I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, challah is probably my favorite thing that I make. It's what I'm best at, it's the most delicious thing I know how to do, it's so good. Like, for real, there's a good chance I might not actually talk about any of the recipe because I'll just keep gushing about this bread. And it's braided, so not only is it f***ing delicious, but it looks super f***ing cool too. If you know how to braid a bread, people are always gonna be way more impressed with you. Like, they think it's some goddamn magic or something. Like, whoa, how did you pull off this sorcery to make this loaf of bread look like Elsa's hair? It's fucking awesome, you guys. Braid a loaf. Actually, braid a loaf of challah, not just any bread. Challah is the best. Okay, sorry, let's actually talk about the baking. Challah is what's called an enriched dough. We'll get back to that later, but at the end of this, what it comes down to is that we'll have a sweeter dough with a tighter crumb. It's simple. Just take your flour, room temperature water, salt, canola oil, yeast, honey, and 2 eggs. Just combine it all together and keep on going until you have a cohesive dough. Let's talk about some science, you guys. So like I said, this challah dough would be referred to as an enriched dough. Enriched doughs are doughs that have eggs or butter or sugar or cream. Basically, the difference between enriched or not is the fat content and whether there's a higher or barely existent fat content, or like no fat at all. So challah has eggs, high fat, and a sugary type substance in the honey. And both of these things are going to inhibit yeast activity, which for challah is a good thing. Because we still want the yeast activity to happen, we still want a risen dough, but in rich doughs we want to be sweeter, so we don't want a ton of that typical fermented yeasty flavor that we love in other doughs. So fair warning right now, you're not going to get a ton of rising action on this loaf during the first proof. Also, you want to either be more vigorous with your kneading or do it for a lot longer. The more you can build up those glutens, the better chance your dough has to get nice and strong. Oh, and like I did here, make sure you clean the bowl to get all the goodness out of it. We don't want to leave any of this behind. Challah is so good. As you can see, when I start kneading here, I'm greasing my surface instead of using flour. Using flour, you risk getting your dough too dry, and with an enriched dough, our flavor's coming a lot from the fat and the sweetener, so we don't want to add too much extra flour. Oh god, go wash your f***ing hand, Kevin. So much f***ing oil. So using oil to grease the surface keeps the non-stick we're looking for, but doesn't significantly change the dough. Back to the issue of rising. Something you might also do is use a strong bread flour instead of all-purpose flour, but ultimately the rise on the dough doesn't matter a ton. You'll get barely any rise out of the first proof, but once you've braided it and let it sit for another 2 hours, it will give you some good size. So yeah, the kneading is going to be a bit more intense here. This dough is also a bit tougher to work with than others, so the kneading process just isn't that much fun. If you've got a stand mixer, feel free to use the dough hook to knead instead of doing it yourself. If it looks smooth, try moving it around in your hands and see how it feels. You can also do what I'm doing here and use the window pane test to see how strong those glutens are. See, you can just barely see my fingers through the dough if you look closely enough. It's tough when the lights are coming from the top, but trust me, in person it looked a lot better. This isn't really a dough you can overwork though, so don't worry if you want to keep going. Anyway, once it's ready, plop it into a bowl, cover it with plastic wrap or a damp tea towel, and set it in a semi-warm place for at least 2 hours. If you're gonna go significantly more than 2 hours though, just go all the way and go for like 12 hours in the fridge overnight. Okay, it's been a couple hours, so grease your surface again and then plop the dough onto it. What we're gonna do is separate this dough into 3 roughly equal pieces. They don't have to be exact, but they should be close. Take your bench scraper and separate your dough. I love mine because it has a handy 6-inch ruler on one side so I can see about where the center of things are. So once we've got our 3 separate pieces, we get to go into the fun part. Take each piece of dough and roll it out to about 20 inches in length. Again, no need to be exact here, but about 20 inches in length will give you a good sized tube of dough that will allow you to still get a good end length out of your braid. If you were someone who played with Play-Doh as a kid, this is what you've been training for your whole damn life. Don't fuck it up now. Just pretend you're a kid again and make some awesome dough tubes. And once we've got all 3 tubes, it's time to braid this bitch. Now honestly, if you don't know how to braid, I'm really not the person to teach you. So like, you can watch this part over and over again, or you can go find one of the millions of tutorials that exist in this world. But really though, not to judge, but if you're old enough to be interested in this video and you don't know how to braid, where have you been? Okay, braiding is done. Finish it off by pinching the ends of the braid together and then kind of tucking them underneath themselves. And then what you're gonna do is kind of squish the braided loaf together a bit. I don't really like a long loaf. I like it to get a good, dense, wide, thick loaf. And if you kind of squish all the strands together, the bread will become one big old thing instead of 3 pieces that don't get along. Then transfer your loaf to a parchment-lined baking sheet, give it another little squish, and then cover it with some plastic wrap. We're gonna let this beautiful monster sit for another 2 hours, and yes, this time we're gonna get a better rise out of it. Most definitely this time. You'll see, it'll be beautiful. Towards the end of the rising time, preheat your oven to 375 degrees, and then once your oven preheats, unwrap your dough, and we're gonna apply an egg wash. It's just 1 whole egg and a tablespoon of cold water. Mix that all together really well, and then brush it all over that beautiful poofy loaf. Don't put too thick of a coating on, but make sure you cover the whole thing. Pop it into the oven for about 20 minutes or until it gets to a color that you like, but warning, your loaf is not done here. This loaf browns really quickly, so what we're gonna do is tent it with some foil and then pop it back in for about 10 to 15 minutes or until the internal temperature reaches 190 degrees. The tin foil serves to reflect heat away super effectively. Science warning, to super simplify things, foil doesn't hold on to heat very well, so heat from the oven hits it and then bounces back. This makes it so that if the outside of your bake is going too fast and getting too dark, the foil can save your ass and still make sure it gets baked and stays edible. Okay, another 10 to 15 minutes later and this beautiful loaf is up to the right temperature and we are good to go. Pull it out of the oven, slap it onto your table or whatever, slice off a piece for yourself, and go to town. And look at that structure. You see, it's not massively airy like some breads, but it has a good solid structure to it. And the best part, because of all the pulling and stretching, you kind of get strings of dough if you pull it apart along the length of the loaf. It's super cool. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to try this recipe for yourself, you can visit my Patreon where all of my recipes are available for free. You don't have to be a patron because charging for educational content is f***ed up. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends, and let me know how it turns out if you do give it a go. Now go bake some shit!